Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. My name is Anna and here on this channel we talk about all things video games. And happy Resident Evil month everyone. I'm sure if you clicked on this video you've been playing Resident Evil Requiem, and for me, when a Resident Evil game drops, it's like Christmas to me. Actually, it's better than Christmas to me because we have this whole lead up to the game releasing, all this excitement, and then the game drops, and then eventually DLC will come out, and then we get to jump back into the game and get hyped for it again. So I love the energy, I love the excitement around Resident Evil, and I was already mourning the fact that eventually this hype will die down because it's just been so fun to participate in. I do plan to talk about my thoughts on the overall release of Resident Evil Requiem and the hype around it later in this video, but first I do want to talk about the game itself and my thoughts on it. Just a quick warning, I do plan to talk about Resident Evil Requiem at length, so if you have not beaten the game yet, this is your spoiler warning. Please click away if you have not completed the game in full. So to get into the game itself a little bit and my review on it, I actually did do a spoiler-free review of this game a few days before the game actually released. Capcom so generously gave me a review code for Resident Evil Requiem. It was the first review copy I've ever gotten for a video game, and to get a review code for one of the most anticipated games of the year, I was extremely honored. But in that review, I obviously didn't want to go into heavy spoiler topics because no one had really played the game yet. So I do want to add a little bit of color back into my initial review now that I can talk about spoilers and major story beats a little bit more. So first I want to talk about the first half of the game, which I thought was very strong. I think one of the strongest starts to a Resident Evil game. I absolutely love Grace's sections. I thought her sections were probably my favorite parts of the game. I love how the beginning at the Renwood Hotel kind of set the mood and also gave us a showcase of Grace's acting and just how powerful it was. I think a lot of us saw the scene where her mother gets murdered and we're like, wow, that she ate down with her acting. I do
Found you.
Oh my god. I thought Angela Santalbano's voice acting was superb. I actually met her in real life at a Resident Evil event a few days prior to the game coming out, and I was really shocked to hear that she had a British accent when I first met her because I was like, whoa, I would have guessed that you were totally American with how natural your accent is in the game, and I couldn't help but gush about how good I thought her acting was. And I was like, girl, you should be nominated for the Game Awards for the Best Actor category because you really ate down with Grace's performance. And of course, the Rhodes Hill Center sections were super fun. I loved the Resident Evil 2 feel of the hospital. It was actually my second time playing this section in my first playthrough because I got to do a demo preview of the entirety of the first Grace section in the hospital when Capcom invited me. But even then, I thought it was a really fun experience to do it again because it's just designed super well and just like really fun gameplay to run through that whole section. Die, bitch! And then we move on to the basement, which I think was my favorite section of the game when I played it in my first playthrough because I thought it was the scariest part. Oh my fucking god! It also featured great set pieces like the processing factory. Don't wake up. 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 No. You're fucking me. Holy shit. Push him in. Holy fucking shit, this is brutal. This is at the point in the game where I realized just how brutal this game was. When I saw the level of gore it actually has, I was like, whoa, this game is like quite brutal. And then of course we got to see the terrifying extent of the girl. Actually, I thought that she was terrifying at first, but I think because of the fact that she, to me, had predictable movements of like, you know, of course she's gonna avoid the light and pop up when you take out those like electrical plugs. I felt like she wasn't the scariest monster to me, at least in Resident Evil, but I do understand why people were so terrified of the section because she is quite a scary monster. And then Leon sections in the first half were obviously short, but I actually didn't mind each character getting the majority of their half and then the second character getting a sprinkle of gameplay in. Wow, doesn't this look awfully familiar? What other game does he get tied up after losing his jacket? My favorite section with Leon in the first half was definitely protecting Grace at the chapel. I really liked how we saw this like crossover gameplay content where, you know, Leon is protecting Grace, who is holding Emily. And I wish we saw a little bit more of this. I thought that there was a lot of potential of the Leon Grace crossover gameplay, and I thought that that was really the only moment where we saw it. So I kind of expected to see more of this later in the game, but I think this was pretty much the extent of it. And then we get to the second half of the game, and I think I speak for a lot of people when I say that I thought that the second half of the game wasn't as strong as the first half. And that's not to say that the second half wasn't good. I thought the game overall is excellent, but it's just that the first half's pacing was a little bit better and I think more compelling. I think Gene Park's review says it best. He says, unfortunately, the game falters once Leon takes center stage and returns to Raccoon City, which was reduced to rubble by a nuclear strike in 1998. This is a familiar problem for every game in the series, as each opens with remarkable confidence only to have the level of design and encounter quality taper off as it goes on. It's not that Leon's segments are bad, this game's weaker second half is stronger than most in the series, but the writing never fully conveys the narrative weight of Leon's return. There are hints of a deeper character arc, but as so often with this franchise, those ideas stop as suggestion, never pushing far enough to feel truly consequential. So I actually completely agree with Gene here. It's not necessarily like I dislike playing as Leon. Of course I love playing as Leon. Resident Evil 4 Remake is one of my favorite games of all time, so I love like the action part of Resident Evil as well, but I think the long stretch in this like more open map of playing as Leon for like 3 to 4 hours, it just doesn't feel as tight and compelling as the first act of this game. At this point, when Resident Evil games have like a really strong start, but then has this like back half that isn't as strong as the first half, I'm calling this the Resident Evil curse because it happens with a bunch of their games. This was the case with like Resident Evil 7. I would even argue that people don't love the factory island section in Resident Evil 4. So yeah, I don't know why like Resident Evil games always kind of have this problem, and I think it happened to an extent in this game a little bit as well. I also didn't love how Grace fades into obscurity in the back half of the game. So this was kind of what I was alluding to when I posted my spoiler-free review, but I thought it was a little too spoilery to get into the details of this. I think narratively she has a really strong start and she has a really interesting background connected to the Resident Evil universe, and then when she starts to just follow around Victor and Zeno, she pretty much becomes irrelevant until the end of the game. And I didn't really like that. I just thought it was like a pretty big narrative fall off for Grace as a character, and thought that there was more to her later into the game. I also thought that the motorcycle chase was very over the top, obviously, but also pure cinema. I really like when Resident Evil does stuff like this that is just really, really freaking cool. Oh my god. This is so fucking cool. It gave me the same feeling of how I thought Krauser's fight in Resident Evil 4 Remake was super cool, because just seeing the cinematic parts of it, I was like, whoa, this is awesome. And then when you get to Raccoon City and RPD, of course, there's a bunch of fun little Easter eggs that I really like. Oh my god. We're back to where it all started. The sign! Oh my god, the sign survived! And then other things that you can find that is a treat if you played Resident Evil 2, and just a bunch of little Easter eggs that felt like a love letter to the fans if you played the other games that this game is connected to. Yep, and then there's Wesker's his goon material. Mr. X coming back was also hilarious. I Don't know why I didn't expect him to just come in like that, but when it happened, I thought it was really funny. No fucking way. No. And then I really liked how Leon actually like opens up about how he felt about that day. I did like getting a glimpse of more of him being vulnerable, that he really wanted to redeem himself from this day because he felt like he couldn't do anything. So this was his chance to finally do something. But I did think it was weird how despite all these flashbacks he was having, he didn't remember Ada or Claire, who were significant parts of that day for Leon. Like, Claire definitely helped out with rescuing Sherry, and Ada was obviously a big part of everything that happened to Leon that day. So yeah, I thought that was kind of weird, but maybe we'll see them in like the future DLC content. I don't know, maybe. And then we get to Ark, and this was probably my least favorite section of the game. I think with Resident Evil games, they tend to often end up their final section in like a lab. I think that happened in Resident Evil 2, 3. And when the setting turns into like this lab section, I always feel like the setting just becomes a little bit sterile, I think because of the nature of the setting. To me, I really love like the gritty horror stuff in Resident Evil, so like more like the stuff in the first half of Requiem and like Resident Evil 7, which is why I said when I got to the Elite Guards, I thought that this was fine as a section, but like I didn't really care too much for it because again, I just really like the more horror emphasis settings. I did think that the Lickers coming back were cool. I really liked how switching from Grace, who has to mostly stealth around the Lickers, and then moving on to just Leon killing all the Lickers and going guns blazing on them was really cool, like the dynamic switching. And then the Hunk fight, I'm not going to argue whether this was Hunk or not. I actually like just don't know enough about RE lore to argue on this point, but I thought it was cool because it was like a mini Krauser fight. And then we get to the ending of the game. Oh my god! Oh my god, what do I do? So I chose to release Elpis in my first playthrough. I'm not going to lie, the only reason why I chose to release Elpis was because I was willing to sacrifice everything to save Leon. I was so scared that Leon was going to die that I was going to go against his word and do everything it took to save him, and that somehow led me to the good ending. I know a lot of people have been like, you didn't pay attention to the game if you thought that the right choice was to destroy Elpis, but I'm not even going to pretend to be like I was super smart in my decision. And actually, as of a week after release, Capcom released their stats for this, and they said that more than 50% of players chose Destroy Elpis in their first playthrough. When I actually talked to my friends who were playing Resident Evil, they were pretty split too. I felt like I had a handful of friends who chose Destroy Elpis and a handful of people who picked Release Elpis, so I think this actually does line up with the stats within my own circles. So I don't really blame a lot of people who picked Destroy Elpis because, again, I think a lot of people were trying to be smartasses about this, but I think that the game purposely threw some curveballs to try to get you to consider destroying more than releasing Elpis, because of course Leon is like begging you to basically not choose him over doing what's right. And I think there's a million reasons as to why we shouldn't trust Spencer, because he's also fucking insane. So like, why should we trust his word that this is supposed to be an antiviral? So I think there are arguments for both sides. I'm just saying that I don't blame anybody who picked Destroy first over Release. I did think though that the ending choice basically determining whether Leon lives or dies, it was hilariously sadistic for the devs to make the ending choice basically determine that, because I feel like this past year we've been speculating this whole time whether this game was going to be Leon's final game, whether he was going to die, whether this was going to be a swan song, and then the game in the canon ending kind of just ends with Leon saying, you know what, I feel actually better than before. So I just thought that was funny, and I'm sure that just means that we're going to see him again in future installments, and he's not going away anytime soon. It's truly the most like Delulu happy ending that they could have given us with the canon ending. I did go back and play a second playthrough to do the bad ending because I was like, you know what, I'm gonna play the game again anyways. I hated every second of it. I thought it was horrible. I hated seeing Leon like that, and I was like, if I thought that this was the actual ending in my first playthrough, I would have absolutely crashed out and lose my mind. So overall, I think Resident Evil Requiem for me is a top 3 Resident Evil game out of the ones that I played. I haven't played like every single RE game, but I played a lot of the modern ones. Originally in my spoiler-free review, I did say that this is probably my second favorite Resident Evil game after Resident Evil 4 Remake. But the thing is, I decided to start playing Resident Evil 7 for myself finally after I beat Requiem because I wanted to keep playing a Resident Evil game, but I wanted to switch it up a bit. For context, when Resident Evil 7 came out, I was way too scared to play it, so I watched a bunch of other people play it, like on YouTube. I was just not a person who played horror games back then, but in the past couple years, I feel like I finally started playing horror games a lot more regularly, so I felt like I was finally ready to play 7, so I did. And I don't know, I really love 7 so much that I think it might be tied for Requiem for me. I know that might be crazy to say, but the setting for 7 was just so perfect for me. I love the Southern Gothic atmosphere, the fact that it's just a normal dude showing up to this house that is just an embodiment of true horror to me, because showing up to a house like that alone and just being like a normal guy, it's so scary. And that's what I really love in Resident Evil, that kind of really scary atmosphere. I just really loved it, even though 7 has that problem of like the back half of the game not being that great after you get past the house. But I just thought that the setting and the bakers were so perfect that I can look past a lot of its flaws in its gameplay. So I don't know. I think if I had to rank it, I think it's like Resident Evil 4 Remake and then Requiem and 7 maybe tied for me right now. But anyways, I think for Requiem specifically, I hope we get to see more of Grace and Leon in the future games. I'm sure we will see more of Leon, of course, but for Grace, really curious to see how she ends up in the future games. And then recently we just got some updates regarding the future content to come to Resident Evil Requiem from the director Nakanishi. He basically said there's photo mode coming, a mini game in May, which I presume to be a mercenaries mode, and then new story DLC content is in development currently. So excited for that. I hope that they touch upon what that ring on Leon's finger means, whether he's actually married or not. I know there's a lot of speculation around that, so I hope they give us more hints towards that. So now I want to zoom out from the game a little bit, and I just want to talk about what it's been like to experience the release of Resident Evil Requiem, because I think that they've had quite an insane marketing timeline and release cycle. So first, the game gets announced at Summer Games Fest last year, and then from then until the release of the game, we had a whole bunch of stuff happening. We had creator demo previews. They were at trade shows like Gamescom and PAX, where they had these really fancy booths for people to play the demo in. They had the RE showcase where they showed off a little bit more gameplay and how the combat works. They had first impression invites for reviewers and creators. This preview invited people to play the first major section with Grace and Leon. And then they had an insane marketing spend to spend on things like billboards, commercials, ads around the world, partnerships. They created a short film just for promoting this game, and then creators got these really cool creator kits. And then in LA, they had this whole event where they partnered with Porsche to put together the launch event. And then they sent out a bunch of review codes, obviously, for reviewers to review the game. But I was actually surprised at how many creators also got access to the game early, so they could create content around it. And then we get to the actual release of the game, and numbers wise, the game went crazy. It got an 89 on Metacritic, which is tied with Pocopio for the best game this year currently, and it has a 9.5 user score on Metacritic, which is tied with Expedition 33 for first place. It demolishes Steam concurrent player records for Resident Evil games, and also on top of that, has some pretty crazy Twitch viewership when the game comes out. They practically sold out of physical copies. It was really hard to get physical copies at a bunch of retailers. And the game ends up selling over 5 million copies in 5 days, which took at least a few months or years for the other Resident Evil games. Culturally, I think that Resident Evil absolutely took over gaming. Whenever I was opening up any of my social media the week leading up to release and then post-release, my entire social media feed was just full of Resident Evil Requiem. When the game released, it was just full of like reactions to story beats, how fun the game is, how scary it was playing as Grace, how amazing it felt to play as Leon again. People's reactions to the Easter eggs, the secrets, and the challenges like the final puzzle that was like impossible for people to figure out. People discussing the lore implications of this game. And now I think we're at the stage where a lot of people are doing their Insanity runs, and also a lot of ridiculous mods are coming out. I've seen some really funny mods come out lately. I think the success of Resident Evil Requiem wasn't unexpected. I think a lot of us expected this game to be huge, especially coming off of how popular Resident Evil has gone the past couple years. But just seeing how successful this game ended up being with its sales numbers and just all around positive reception with the game has been impressive to see regardless. And it's crazy that this success of Resident Evil Requiem is just a part of Capcom's amazing generational run since 2017. I'm not going to bore you with a history lesson on what exactly kickstarted the Capcom Renaissance starting around 2017, but to summarize, it was a combination of the Reach for the Moon engine being created plus an internal organizational pivot towards appealing to global audiences with Capcom games, but still making their games good. There's a great article on IGN explaining this with interviews from the Capcom team. It says, alongside the engine upgrade came a new mandate to ensure Capcom's games were being made not just for existing territory-specific fans, but for a global audience. If you look at almost all of Capcom's games released during the PS3 and Xbox 360 era, you get the feeling that the company was going all in on trying to capture an imagined version of the Western games market. The action-heavy Resident Evil 4 was a big hit, true, but the more gun-focused spin-offs like Umbrella Corps as well as sci-fi shooter series Lost Planet were all clearly chasing late 2000s Western gaming trends to no avail. After several years, Capcom realized it needed to create games that could appeal to everyone, not just fans of traditional Western genres. What I want to talk about is how Capcom was able to stand out from the rest of its competitors in the space with their games, but as a brand as well. Other competitors being like these huge Japanese companies in like the AAA gaming space. So I think of like Square Enix, Bandai, Namco, Sega, Konami, Nintendo, companies like that. To me, Capcom, since its continuation of its renaissance, has established itself as this very like premium brand and likable reputation compared to its counterparts. And there's a few factors I think that goes into this. First and foremost, their games are good. I always say this when I have conversations with game studios or other developers, that the most important thing for any game to be successful is that it just needs to be good. And it's crazy that we kind of forget about this. A lot of people try to argue like maybe we didn't do enough marketing or we didn't do enough with creators to make this game really blow up. But I really don't think any of that really matters if your game isn't good enough. One of my mottos when it comes to games is good enough isn't good enough anymore, especially in this landscape where hundreds, thousands of games are coming out each week, each month. There's no way that a game can stand out anymore if you have this mentality, this mindset that the game is good enough to release. Marketing your game truly doesn't matter if your game sucks. The bottom line is that marketing can only do so much if your game sucks. Sure, I still think that discoverability is very hard and it's hard to get your game in front of people in the first place, but this is why I also think that we see single dev projects take off, like a Balatro made by a single person is able to take off when they get the attention they need, because despite not having this like huge budget for marketing or whatever, the game still does well because it's a good game. On the other hand, we see games like a High Guard where they have millions to spend on development and marketing, yet the game shuts down shortly after release because it's struggling against these other exceptional games in the same genre. IGN says, since 2017, Capcom has released a Game of the Year contender on a nearly annual basis. In a time when major studios are struggling to find consistency, Capcom's winning streak of 10 critically acclaimed games in less than a decade is a major outlier. And then when the game is good, I think everything else flows from there. All the marketing, all the advertisements, all the partnerships, it all just like makes sense from there. But you need that baseline of the game just being good, and that's what Capcom has really had with their recent releases. The second major factor I want to talk about is it's not just about buying games when it comes to Capcom, it's about being part of the overall culture. They've made strategic decisions and positioned their brand in a way that's appealing beyond just having good games. I think many people bought Resident Evil Requiem because they saw a lot of the hype and excitement around this game. There was something that was going on that they wanted to be a part of, and there was an aspect of FOMO they were experiencing with how much fun everybody else was playing the game. I also think that Resident Evil has this effect where a lot of people want to play a bunch of Resident Evil games before a major release, and then they do the same thing after release as well. And this isn't just a feeling, this is in actual sales numbers. In the last quarter of 2025, over 1 million units of Resident Evil 4 Remake sold in anticipation for Resident Evil Requiem. Speaking from personal experience, I ran to play Resident Evil 7 Biohazard right after finishing Requiem because I just wanted more Resident Evil. I wanted to play more of their games, and I wanted to keep this excitement around Resident Evil going, but I was looking for an experience that was a little bit more horror focused compared to Requiem. I think Capcom is also trying to expand its universe of games with things like movies, TV shows, orchestra shows. I always say this is comparable to something like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, where yes, you have your games, that's like your baseline of where your characters and IP are born, but how do you expand it from there? So I think it's cool that they're trying to do things like the Street Fighter movie this year. We got the Resident Evil movie with the director that did Barbarian. The next season of the Devil May Cry TV show is coming out. I just went to the Monster Hunter Orchestra in LA, and I know they're about to do a bunch of orchestra shows for Resident Evil soon. So I think this like expansion of their IP is just being part of like the overall Capcom universe beyond just being a player of their games. Deciding to put Resident Evil in Fortnite, as silly as it sounds, is a strategic decision for them to reach the younger demographic as well. I think that this is a problem that a lot of like legacy Japanese gaming companies try to tackle, of just trying to capture more of the younger demographic, because they have a lock on older audiences, of course, with their games, because their games are usually something that originated from like the 90s and are just older. But a lot of these companies also recognize that if you don't capture the younger demographic, it's just not sustainable for a lot of these companies to not convert more of the younger audience to be also lifelong fans. So yes, Grace Ashcroft hitting these Fortnite dances, it is a strategic decision overall in Capcom's attempt to reach more of the younger audience. Related to that, choosing to bring Leon back into Resident Evil Requiem is absolutely a strategic decision. It's crazy to see how much Leon and the effect of Resident Evil 4 Remake has brought in a huge wave of new fans into the Resident Evil franchise. I think a lot of girls and gays started getting into Resident Evil because of Leon, and a lot of it happened in 2023 when Leon just became this social media heartthrob across Twitter and TikTok. And that's absolutely helped in Resident Evil being relevant in fandom spaces again, on social media again. Speaking for myself, I think it was definitely Resident Evil 4 Remake that got me really back into Resident Evil again. I actually grew up playing Resident Evil 2 OG, but from then I think I fell off with being interested in the games. It wasn't until Resident Evil 7 that I got interested back into the games again, but 7 and 8 were actually too scary for me. But it wasn't until Resident Evil 4 Remake and seeing all the excitement around Leon and obviously how good the game is that I decided to finally pull the trigger and start playing the games myself, even though I was scared. And that opened the floodgates for me for sure. I think from that moment on, I was like, I'm playing every single game on release. I'm going to go back and play all the Resident Evil games. And I think that's why that game turned out to be very special for me as a lifelong Resident Evil fan. Resident Evil Requiem also partnered with brands like Porsche and Hamilton, and I think a lot of people were confused about this. I think a lot of people were confused because they think about it in terms of like, did they partner with these brands because they thought we could afford Porsches and $2,000 watches? But I personally didn't really see it that way. My marketing brain was kind of like, Resident Evil is the best-selling franchise for Capcom. It is their most premium IP. So for a brand like that under Capcom, they want to give it partnerships that feel premium, that feel very high quality. To me, the goal wasn't necessarily to get people to buy Porsches or these very expensive watches, because I think that's a pretty unrealistic conversion goal. But the idea, I think, was to elevate the Resident Evil IP that it can't really be compared to other games. I don't see a lot of games that are putting exact replicas of these very expensive products directly into the game. I also think that Capcom is pretty good at being not overly protective with their IP and playing into fandom culture. We saw a glimpse of this even in like the update video from Nakanishi, where he's like going through these slides, and the first slide is of Leon in like a romance TV drama, which I think is hilarious. Just these hilarious ways to see the characters from Resident Evil Requiem. And I think this is part of Resident Evil culture, where of course the games can be very serious and scary. There's like violence and gore, but at the same time people recognize that it's campy, it's hilarious, it doesn't take itself too seriously. Nakanishi even posted on his Instagram story the mod of Leon riding a bicycle during the bike chase scene and laughing at it instead of discouraging them. And then Resident Evil, on their brand accounts on social media, they encourage Leon thirst edits. They play into that. They post thirst edits themselves. They did interviews with Nick Apostolides where he's reading Leon thirst tweets. I think this is all part of them playing into the fandom culture that has been made within Resident Evil. This is all very antithetical to something like a Nintendo, where they are very protective of their IP, the way you talk about their characters. They actively discourage modding. They don't like when people speedrun their games. They're very protective and controlling of their IP to the point where I would say it's a little puritanical. And then the third factor as to why I think Capcom is really able to set itself apart is I think they avoid diluting their brand with games that aren't quality or aren't true to Capcom. So I think about brands like Square Enix, where of course they have amazing games that we all love and cherish, like the Final Fantasy games, Kingdom Hearts. But despite having amazing games like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, they do have some pretty like random games that pop up every now and then that they decide to publish, like Killer Inn. Killer Inn released actually pretty recently, and I just feel like no one really cares about this kind of game. I think it's random in terms of like the kind of games they released. When I think of Square Enix, I think of really strong JRPG titles like Final Fantasy games and Octopath Traveler. So having something like a Killer Inn, it's like, it just seems a little random and kind of seems like, what's the point? It just seems like they sometimes have these misses when it comes to publishing games. We also have brands like Bandai Namco that have massively successful games like Elden Ring, of course, but they also just have all these games that like just are scattered all over the place. Companies like Konami, I just feel like they're like a mess of an organization with all their stuff going beyond games. They have like their whole pachinko business, and I think they're only just realizing that they should develop IP like Silent Hill games, because they realize that it can be much bigger than it is currently. So I think they're just starting to invest and release more games under the Silent Hill name. And then we get to Capcom, where yes, they do have some lesser known AA titles here and there, but for the most part, they pretty consistently stick to their most popular IP with titles that are on average pretty good games. If you look at their product list over the years, you do mostly see the most popular IP that they have, like Monster Hunter games, the Ace Attorney games, Resident Evil games, and then they have a bunch of highly anticipated titles to come, of course, like I think by the time this video comes out, Monster Hunter Stories 3 will be out, Pragmata's coming out, we have a new Onimusha game coming out, Mega Man Dual Override was announced, and then, of course, a new old-coming game in development. To me, this signals that Capcom rather stay quiet than release slop just to fill up their content calendar. To summarize from IGN, but what's more impressive is that Capcom's mission of making global mainstream games did not dilute its games in the slightest. Instead, Capcom appears to have found the ultimate balance of keeping its games true to themselves, whether that's the pure survival horror of Resident Evil, competitive spirit of Street Fighter, or the unique battle systems of Monster Hunter, all while expanding the audience for these games by millions. Many of Capcom's contemporaries are now finding themselves where Capcom was just a decade ago, fruitlessly chasing trends and losing sight of their identities. But for For Capcom, the changes it made over the past decade has resulted in a new golden age that shows no sign of slowing down. And all this has not been for nothing, right? According to their latest financial report, their sales numbers and profits are looking great. They had their highest sales numbers in 2025 in a 9-month period, with Resident Evil, Monster Hunter, Street Fighter, Mega Man, and Devil May Cry leading the charge. All in all, I think Capcom stands in stark contrast to the rest of the industry and other competitors in the space, whether that's talking about financial success, game quality, and cultural relevance. With this generational run that Capcom is having, I'm certainly excited for the future of Capcom and their games. I admit that this video was full of me glazing them, but I've been a lifelong Capcom fan, so of course I'm going to be biased for their games and how I talk about them. Like I mentioned, I grew up playing Resident Evil 2 as my first Resident Evil game. I also grew up with Mega Man games. I really love Mega Man X5. I watched my friend and my brother play that a lot, and the music from that game is timeless to me. I also watch a lot of esports and people compete in Street Fighter. I've been to EVO a bunch of times, and Street Fighter is by far my favorite title to watch at those tournaments. And I'm still making my way with getting to the other IP under the Capcom umbrella. I did start Ace Attorney, but I didn't get very far, but I plan to definitely get to that soon. And then I definitely want to play the Devil May Cry games. I have not really touched those games. And this isn't even speaking about the games that I already plan to play, like Pragmata. I'll definitely be playing that. Pragmata's actually made some quite impressive milestones already. They have over 2 million demo downloads and 2 million wishlists, which is crazy happening right after the success of Resident Evil Requiem. They're just putting out bangers after bangers. And then when Mega Man Dual Override comes out and the new Okami title, I will be playing those games day one. But I want to know your guys' thoughts. What did you think of Resident Evil Requiem? How would you rank it? What do you think about Capcom and its games as a whole? Capcom's definitely going to continue to have a really interesting year with obviously the games that are coming out, but again, like the movies, TV shows, other stuff that they're doing in the space. So it'll be really cool to see what exactly they accomplish in 2026. That's all I have to say for this video. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I would love to read them. And thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next one. Bye.